Imagine you are looking at, well, the blueprints for the entire universe.
Like the ultimate schematic.
Yeah, exactly. From the incredibly tight, stable bundle of a single helium atom all the way up to, the expanding edges of the cosmos itself.
Right.
And if you asked a standard physicist today what that blueprint looks like, they'd hand you this massive, incredibly complicated, just messy schematic.
Oh, it would be hundreds of pages long.
Right. And it would be full of all these arbitrary numbers, random constants, and empirical fudge factors.
Which is a term physicists actually use, by the way.
Exactly. We are told we just have to accept those factors because, well, that's what our instruments measure. So it's this chaotic collection of rules holding reality together like duct tape.
That is a very apt description of the current paradigm, yeah.
But what if it wasn't? What if, instead of that chaotic blueprint, the entire universe was built on a single, inevitable, elegant geometric pattern?
I mean, that is the ultimate dream of theoretical physics, isn't it?
It has to be.
We are so accustomed to the universe being described as this, patchwork quilt. You've got quantum mechanics for the microscopic stuff and then general relativity for the macroscopic, and they don't play well together. So the idea of a single geometric master key that unlocks both scales, it feels almost too good to be true.
We really crave that underlying unity. So, welcome to the deep dive. If you are tuning in, you are someone who wants to peek behind the curtain of reality, and today we have one heck of a curtain to pull back.
We really do. It is a massive one.
We are jumping straight into an incredibly dense, highly ambitious, and frankly radical theoretical physics preprint. It dates to 2025 and 2026, and it's by an author named George James Dukas.
And the title alone is weighty.
Yeah, it's called Nuclear Structure from Golden Ratio Geometry, Transdimensional Unified Field Theory V9.
Which is a mouthful.
Right, so we were just going to call it TDUFT for short.
Sounds good. And the scope of this paper, I mean, it really cannot be overstated.
No, it's wild.
The stated mission here is to essentially rewrite everything we know about physics, to take the Standard Model, which is widely considered the most successful scientific theory in human history,
Yeah.
and just completely replace its foundation using nothing but the golden ratio.
But before we get into the weeds of atomic geometry and all that, we do need to offer a very clear, explicit disclaimer to you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
Because as we dig deeper into this text, the author eventually ventures far beyond theoretical physics and makes some, let's say, highly charged theological and metaphysical claims.
The transition in the later chapters is stark. I mean, the author moves from strict quantum mechanics to explicitly discussing the nature of God.
Literally attempting to map mathematical constants into a religious framework.
Yeah.
And our role here today is to act strictly as impartial guides. We aren't endorsing the physics, and we certainly aren't endorsing or debunking the theology either.
Right, we're just acting as cartographers here.
Yeah, exactly. We are simply mapping out this fascinating, intricate, and honestly somewhat mind-bending universe that the author has constructed on the page. We're here to look at the architecture of the idea.
And that architecture is built on a very real, very persistent problem in modern physics.
The fudge factors.
Right. To understand why someone would attempt to write a transdimensional unified field theory in the first place, you really have to understand the deep-seated frustration physicists have with the Standard Model.
Because it works, right? Like, it predicts things.
It is incredibly successful at predicting the outcomes of particle collider experiments.
Yeah.
But it has a glaring philosophical flaw. It relies on dozens of empirically fitted parameters.
Okay, so when you say fitted parameters, you mean, like, we observe something happening in a lab, we don't know why it happens, so we just invent a mathematical constant and plug it into the equation, just to force the math to match our observation.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Take the nuclear shell model, for example.
Mm-hmm.
This is the model that describes how protons and neutrons arrange themselves inside an atomic nucleus. Now, to make their equations actually work, physicists had to add something called spin-orbit coupling.
Spin-orbit coupling.
Yeah, it's a specific term that describes how a particle's spin interacts with its motion around the nucleus. But the strength of that interaction, they literally had to tune those parameters perfectly by hand to match the experimental data.
So the Standard Model is phenomenal at explaining what happens.
Right.
But it hits a brick wall when asked why. Like, why those specific numbers? Why those specific coupling strengths?
Precisely. And the author of TDUFT looks at this vast, complex system of tuned dials and just says, this isn't fundamental. These are all just fudge factors.
And Dukas claims to have eliminated these fudge factors completely. Like, completely.
It's a bold
He
claim,
claims to have derived the entire structure of the universe from a single quadratic equation.
which is fascinating because if you are going to ditch the standard model, you need a foundation that requires zero empirical input.
You need pure math.
Right, you need pure mathematics.
Now, I remember quadratic equations from high school algebra, and they usually just gave me a headache.
Yeah, lots of groaning in math class.
Right. I certainly didn't look at a polynomial and think
No.
this could replace quantum mechanics. So how does one single equation build a universe?
Well, the author chooses arguably the most famous quadratic in all of mathematics. It's x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
Okay.
That is the engine of this entire theory. And when you solve that simple equation, you get two roots.
The answers, basically.
Exactly. The first is the golden ratio, denoted by the Greek letter phi, which is approximately 1.618.
Okay.
And the second root is its conjugate, Ci, which is approximately negative 0.618.
The golden ratio, I mean, we see this in art, in architecture, the spiral of a nautilus shell.
The way leaves arrange themselves on a stem to maximize sunlight, yeah.
Right, it's everywhere in nature, but
Uh-huh.
using it as the foundation of quantum physics is a massive, massive leap.
It is, but the author goes further than just using the numbers algebraically. He assigns them deep functional physical interpretations.
How so?
In TDUFT, phi, that 1.618 value, is dubbed the golden builder.
The builder.
Right. It represents velocity, outward expansion, and static structural geometry. It is the fundamental force of building.
Okay, and the other one, psi.
Its conjugate, psi, the negative 0.618 value, is the tension bearer. It represents time, inward contraction, entropy, and wave dynamics.
Let me stop you on the word conjugate because that math term gets thrown around a lot.
Sure.
Conceptually, a conjugate is like a balancing counterpart, right? It flips a sign or mirrors a function so that when you combine them, the messy parts kind of cancel out.
That is a great conceptual grasp of it, yeah. Because they are roots of the exact same equation, phi and psi are inextricably linked by these beautiful, inevitable mathematical relationships.
Like what?
For instance, if you add them together, phi plus psi, you get exactly 1. If you multiply them phi times psi, you get exactly negative 1. Yeah, they are an asymmetric pair that perfectly balance each other out.
So phi pushes out and builds the rigid scaffolding of reality, while psi pulls inward, providing the tension and the wave-like motion.
Exactly.
They're like cosmic dance partners holding the universe in equilibrium.
And that equilibrium is what allows the author to construct what he calls dimensional tiers.
Dimensional tiers. Okay, let's unpack that.
Let's look at the transition from late to mass. Physics has always wrestled with how a massless photon relates to a solid particle.
Right, the classic wave-particle duality stuff.
Right. In TDUFT, light exists as an electromagnetic wave on a two-dimensional plane. The author calls this D2.
Okay, 2 dimensions, flat.
Solid mass, however, exists in three-dimensional volumetric space, or D3.
But how does an abstract ratio, pull a flat 2D plane into a 3D volume?
Through a specific mathematical identity derived from that original quadratic equation.
Okay.
The paper highlights the identity phi to the power of negative 1 plus phi to the power of negative 2 equals 1.
Wait, say that again?
Phi inverted plus phi inverted and squared equals exactly 1. The author proposes this isn't just a numerical quirk. He claims this identity literally governs the dimensional step.
I am really struggling to visualize that. How does math literally fold physical space?
Think of it as a geometric folding mechanism. The terms represent the fractional geometric projections of the golden ratio in lower dimensions.
Like shadows of a 3D object on a flat wall.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
When they sum to exactly 1, the author argues this represents the mathematical locking mechanism where flat, 2D electromagnetic energy folds over itself.
It folds over itself.
Yes, binding its own tension to pop into a stable 3D volumetric structure. The emergence of solid mass is literally encoded in the way the golden ratio relates to its own fractions.
The analogy popping into my head right now is comparing the standard model to a massive Rube Goldberg machine.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like a house held together by thousands of highly specific, custom-made 3D printed brackets. You have a special bracket for the strong nuclear force, a custom screw for the mass of an electron.
And they all have to be exactly right.
Right. If you lose one specific screw, the whole roof caves in. But TDUFT is claiming you don't need any custom parts.
Not at all.
It claims you only need one shape of a self-replicating origami fold of this phi ratio. You just keep folding this one geometric shape in on itself, and eventually you build the entire house.
It replaces an engineering manual with a purely self-referential geometric seed.
But, and I have to push back here,
Yeah.
because math on a chalkboard is pristine, it's perfect. Reality is incredibly messy.
It is very messy.
An atomic nucleus isn't a static drawing. It's a chaotic swarm of quantum fluctuations. How does a theoretical static ratio actually lock a physical, messy atom together in the real world?
To address that, we have to move out of abstract dimensional math and look at the tangible building blocks of matter.
Okay.
We have to examine how TDUFT claims to rebuild the atomic nucleus.
All right, let's get into it. Part 2, rebuilding the nucleus.
In nuclear physics, there's a very famous phenomenon known as magic numbers.
Magic numbers.
Yes. These are specific quantities of protons or neutrons, specifically 2, 8, 20, 20, 50, 82, and 126.
Okay, so just those specific integers.
Right. When a nucleus contains exactly this many protons or neutrons, it exhibits exceptional stability. Helium has 2 protons and 2 neutrons, making it incredibly stable. Oxygen has 8. Calcium has 20.
And the term magic sort of implies that early physicists observed this stability but had no underlying mechanism to explain why those specific numbers were so special.
They were totally baffled by it for a long time. Eventually, Maria Guppert-Mayer and J. Hans D. Jensen developed the nuclear shell model to explain it.
Which won them a Nobel Prize, right?
It did. They realized protons and neutrons sit in concentric energy shells, similar to electrons. But to make their complex formulas actually output the numbers 2, 8, 20, and 28, they had to introduce that complex spin-orbit coupling term we discussed earlier.
The dials, they had to tune the dials.
They had to tune the dials.
And TDUFT claims those magic numbers are not empirical accidents that require tuned dials.
TDUFT claims they are geometric inevitabilities based on the Fuchs-Shell rule.
Meaning what, exactly?
Instead of relying on a soup of quantum probability subshells, TDUFT asserts that each nuclear shell is defined by particles sitting at specific geometric vertices dictated by powers of the golden ratio.
Okay, I was reading this section of the source text, and I had to stop and reread it because it sounds like ancient Greek philosophy merged with modern physics.
It really does.
The author takes those first 5 magic numbers, 2, 8, 20, 28, and 50, and maps them directly onto the 5 platonic solids.
Right, the platonic solids. These are the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the icosahedron, the cube, and the dodecahedron.
Like Dungeons and Dragons dice.
Basically, yes. They are the only 5 regular convex polyhedra that can exist in 3-dimensional space. Their geometry is absolute and mathematically perfect.
And the mapping is remarkably specific in the paper. Helium-4, with the magic number 2, maps to the tetrahedron. Oxygen-16, magic number 8, maps to the octahedron. Calcium-40 maps to the 20-sided icosahedron. Nickel-56 maps to the cube. And Tin-100 maps to the dodecahedron.
And the author calculates this using the Euler topological quantity.
Let's define that, because that sounds like heavy jargon. Euler topology is essentially a simple formula that relates the faces, edges, and vertices of a shape.
Right, that's it, exactly.
Vertices minus edges plus faces always equals 2 for these shapes.
Yes. The author uses that topological constant combined with the golden ratio to calculate the exact capacities of the nuclear shells.
But how does a shape determine capacity? I mean, how does a literal shape hold particles?
Think of it this way. The standard model says particles stack up based on complex rules of quantum spin and angular momentum.
Right.
TDUFT asserts that the physical geometry of 3-dimensional space itself forms a cage. That cage can only hold a certain number of particles before its structural integrity is maximized.
Like filling up seats in a specific shaped room.
Exactly. Once the vertices of the octahedron are filled, you are mathematically forced to start building the next geometric layer, the icosahedron. The magic numbers are just the points where a protonic solid is perfectly complete.
But these particles aren't just sitting frozen in a geometric cage, are they? The paper goes into detail about their behavior inside these shells, specifically breaking them down into velocity and entropy.
And this is where the phi and psi numbers come roaring back.
The builder and the tension bearer.
Yes. The author unpacks how each nuclear shell possesses a normalized velocity fraction, which he labels C sub k, and an entropy fraction, labeled S sub k.
Okay.
And because they are derived from that original balancing quadratic, these two fractions always add up exactly to 1.
So velocity plus entropy equals 100% of the shell's state.
Yes. In the lightest elements, like helium, the geometry is tight. The velocity fraction is very high, around 27.6%, and the entropy fraction is 72.4%.
So it's moving fast.
The author calls helium velocity bound. It's highly energetic, incredibly stable, and tightly bound.
But as you move to heavier elements, the outer shells get physically larger. The geometric cage expands.
And as it expands, the velocity fraction plummets. By the time you reach calcium, which maps to the icosahedron, the velocity fraction is only 5.3%.
This actually makes intuitive sense to me. Heavier elements become increasingly entropy-dominated.
Exactly.
They're less about the tight, energetic speed of the Golden ratio and more subjected to the diffuse, wave-like tension of its conjugate.
The psi factor takes over.
Right. The geometry gets so large that the entropy tears it apart. It explains why heavier elements on the periodic table are radioactive.
It is a conceptually elegant mapping of atomic decay, for sure. But as you pointed out earlier, elegance isn't enough to overthrow a dominant paradigm.
We need proof.
Theoretical physics demands falsifiable predictions. And this brings us to one of the most critical claims in the entire paper. The author uses this pure geometry to predict the binding energy of these nuclei.
Binding energy is essentially the amount of force required to completely rip the nucleus apart into individual protons and neutrons, right?
Correct. Using only the fishshell geometry, the Platonic mappings, and a universal constant he derives entirely from the math called Entor.
Entor. E-N-T-O-R.
Right. Using that, the author calculates the ratio of the binding energy of oxygen-16 to helium-4. TDUFT predicts the ratio should be exactly 4.39.
And the real-world, experimentally measured ratio.
The physical reality measured in a lab is 4.51.
Okay, wait. The theory predicts 4.39. Reality is 4.51. That is a 2.6% deviation.
It's remarkably close.
It is, but wait, I have to ask, how do we know this Entor constant isn't just a different kind of fudge factor? Did he just reverse engineer a number to make 4.39 look good?
That is the crucial question any peer reviewer would ask.
Right.
The author's defense is that Entor, which evaluates to 0.00007542, is not fitted to experimental data.
Where does it come from then?
It is derived intrinsically from the dimensional geometry of the philatus itself. If his math holds up, he achieved a 2.6% error margin from pure mathematical first principles without tuning the equation to match the data. In the realm of nuclear theory, achieving that kind of accuracy without empirical inputs is a startling claim.
It is startling.
Yeah.
But I'm still looking at this from a mechanical perspective, and I keep hitting a wall regarding the math.
Which part?
The Golden ratio is an irrational number. It's 1.61803398887. It just goes on into infinity without repeating.
Right, it never resolves.
So if you are squaring and cubing an irrational number to build the physical dimensions of a shell, the math on paper is going to produce fractions, endless, messy decimals.
It has to, yes.
But in physical reality, nature doesn't deal in 0.6 of a proton. You can't have a fraction of a whole particle in a stable nucleus. So what happens to the mathematical decimals? How does the universe round up to a whole number to give us a magic number like exactly 8 or exactly 20?
That is the most profound hurdle the theory has to clear, and it serves as the exact transition the author makes in the text.
Okay.
You were asking about the fractional mismatches, the leftovers. The author's answer to this is his most vital mathematical bridge. He calls it the Eternum Nexus.
The Eternum Nexus. It sounds like an artifact from a fantasy novel.
It carries a heavy philosophical tone, definitely, but mathematically, it is the bridge that makes the entire geometric universe function. The author explains that the nucleus cannot rely purely on static, rigid geometry.
Because of the fractions.
Right. It relies on two interlocking systems that have to operate in perfect harmony.
The additive system and the multiplicative system.
Yes. The additive system is based on the identity phi plus psi equals 1. This system governs the static geometric structure.
Okay.
It dictates the Platonic cages, the discrete steps of the shells, the literal architecture of space.
So it's the concrete and the steel beams.
Exactly. Then you have the multiplicative system, which is based on the identity phi times psi equals -1.
Right, the conjugate balance.
This system governs wave propagation, entropy, and the dynamic tension of forces coupling across those geometric shells.
So it's the vibrational stress running through the steel beams?
Yes.
But as we established, when you overlay this rigid, irrational geometry with propagating waves, you get fractional mismatches. The integers don't line up perfectly to yield whole magic numbers.
So where do the fractions go? They go into zero.
Into zero, they just vanish. That sounds like a mathematical cheat code.
It would be if he were using standard mathematics. But the author forces a complete redefinition of the number zero.
How so?
In standard arithmetic, 0 is a void. It is the absence of value. It means nothing is there. But in TDUFT, 0 is not a void. It is the primordial receptacle.
The primordial receptacle.
It is an intensely active balancing operator.
An active 0. Okay, I need a visual for this. Let's say I'm doing an international wire transfer.
Okay, let's run with that.
I am sending you euros, and you are receiving dollars. The exchange rate is some long irrational decimal. When the transaction hits the global banking ledger, there are fractions of a penny left over.
Right, because you can't hand someone a third of a cent.
Exactly. The bank doesn't just delete them, because the ledger has to balance perfectly. And they can't give you half a physical penny. So they have a hidden account, like a cosmic clearinghouse, that automatically absorbs the exact fractional pennies in every single transaction across the globe.
I like this.
It acts as a buffer, ensuring that you and I only ever deal in whole, stable currency.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The active 0 in TDUFT is that cosmic clearinghouse. But the author gives it a physical mechanism.
What's the mechanism?
He describes it mathematically as a curved dimensional bridge. The 0 actually acts as a torsion operator. It introduces a physical twist in the dimensional fabric.
So it's not just a ledger, it's like a torsion spring.
Yes. It absorbs the fractional projection mismatches between the static geometry and the moving waves and stores that fractional remainder as curvature.
Oh.
It acts as a cosmic shock absorber. It literally curves the flat, rigid geometry of the golden ratio into propagating waves. By actively absorbing the exact fractional deficit, this primordial receptacle ensures that the final output of the equation results in exact, whole integers.
The physical particles that manifest.
Right. There is 0 remainder left in the physical space.
So because of this torsion spring, nature only ever outputs a whole number of particles.
Yeah.
It guarantees you get exactly 8 protons for oxygen.
Every single time.
It's like a rounding function embedded directly into the fabric of spacetime.
The author writes that variance, the messiness of reality that we observe, is actually 0 in the underlying structure.
The apparent need for rounding is just an illusion.
It's a projection artifact of our perspective in 3 dimensions. The primordial 0 absorbs all the tension, making those nuclear magic numbers exact geometric necessities.
The concept of a shock absorber taking on all the irrational decimal tension so that the universe can exist as whole, stable objects is beautiful.
It's very elegant.
But, elegant mathematical philosophy is one thing. To disrupt modern physics, to make the establishment actually pay attention, a theory must make falsifiable predictions that actively beat the current models.
It has to win a fight in the real world.
Exactly. And that leads us directly to what the author calls the smoking gun in Appendix K.
Oh, Appendix K. If the eternum nexus is the theoretical heart of the paper, Appendix K is where it shows its teeth.
Right.
This is where the theory attempts to empirically humiliate the standard model.
Let's set the historical scene for the listener. This involves a real-world experimental crisis that played out around 2025 and 2026, involving a highly unstable isotope called molybdenum-84, or Mo-84.
To appreciate the crisis, you really must understand what the reigning physics paradigm expected at the time.
Okay.
Molybdenum-84 contains exactly 42 protons and 42 neutrons. Now, according to the traditional nuclear shell model, when a nucleus has an equal number of protons and neutrons, and they sit at specific harmonic oscillator values, the nucleus is expected to be rigidly spherical.
Like a perfect heavy bowling ball.
Yes. It is mathematically supposed to be perfectly round and highly resistant to deformation. That was the absolute consensus prediction.
But then, an experimental facility actually managed to observe Mo-84.
They did.
And a paper was published in Nature Communications detailing the real-world data.
And the observation utterly shattered the standard prediction. Molybdenum-84 was not spherical in the slightest.
Not a bowling ball.
Not at all. In fact, it showed maximum deformation. It was highly stretched out, behaving more like a spinning football.
Oh, football.
Yeah, it exhibited what nuclear physicists call an 8-proton, 8-neutron collective excitation. It moved and flexed in a way that directly contradicted the rigid spherical dogma of the standard model.
And this is where the author plants their flag. The author highlights that TDUFT predicted this extreme deformation before the experimental data was published.
Which is precisely why he calls it the smoking gun. A predictive victory is worth 1,000 post-hoc explanations.
I mean, definitely. So I have to ask, how did a solo researcher, using a geometry based on a single quadratic equation, predict the physical shape of an isotope when the entire institutional apparatus of the standard model got it entirely wrong?
It's a great question.
What is the actual mechanism at play in his math?
It comes down to how TDUFT calculates the boundaries of the shells. The standard model treats the nucleus as a single, unified potential, like a singular bucket holding everything.
Right.
TDUFT, however, calculates the proton shells and the neutron shells separately, and it does so using the natural logarithms of the golden ratio.
Let's pause on the math for a second. What is the physical significance of using a natural logarithm here?
Well,
Because a log basically maps exponential growth back into a straight line of additive steps, right?
that's a brilliant way to frame it, yes. Because the golden ratio's geometry expands exponentially, the natural logarithm flattens that exponential growth into discrete sequential steps. It maps the multiplicative waves back onto the additive physical structures. When you plug 42 protons and 42 neutrons into the TDUFT logarithmic equation, it places both the protons and the neutrons at the exact same mid-shell position.
Mid-shell meaning they are caught exactly halfway between one stable platonic shape and the next.
Exactly. The math outputs a spatial value of 6.4982 for both the protons and the neutrons.
Almost exactly 6.5.
Right. That places them right at the peak between shell 6 and shell 7. In the geometry of TDUFT, when both protons and neutrons are sitting at this exact mid-shell peak, you get maximum interference between the phi building force and the psi tension wave.
Oh, I see. So they are caught in the maximum amount of structural tension possible.
Yes. And that maximum interference leads directly to maximum physical deformation.
The football shape.
Exactly. The math perfectly dictates that the 8 outer protons and 8 outer neutrons will jump the geometric shell gaps together, creating that exact collective excitation that was observed in the lab.
That's wild.
The standard model assumed rigid, independent motion. TDUFT proved that the nucleus behaves as a flexible, harmonically resonant geometry.
And to prove it wasn't just a mathematical fluke, the author contrasts molybdenum-84 with another isotope, lead-208.
Right, lead-208 is famous in standard physics as a doubly magic nucleus. It has 82 protons and 126 neutrons. The standard model says it should be flawlessly, perfectly spherical.
But what do the golden ratio equations say?
When you run lead-208 through the TDUFT natural log equations, the protons sit at a value of 11.901.
Which is really close to 12.
Right. It's very close to a whole integer, meaning the protons want to form a nearly perfect sphere, but the neutrons calculate to 13.098.
So the neutrons are at a mid-shell position.
Yes. Because one component is spherical and the other is caught mid-shell, TDUFT predicts lead-208 will exhibit a moderate prolate deformation. It will be slightly stretched out.
And experimental data confirms that it is stretched.
Experimental data confirms the TDUFT prediction perfectly.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment here because we have to ground ourselves.
Sure.
If this holds up, this author is claiming that his single geometric framework outperformed supercomputers running established quantum models.
That is what he's claiming.
That is a staggering assertion. It recontextualizes the entire preprint. This is no longer just interesting theoretical musing. It is a claimed empirical victory over the most successful theory in human history.
It is a massive claim. The author is essentially taunting the establishment, saying your tuned parameters blinded you to the underlying reality.
Yeah.
You fit your dials to expect a bowling ball, so your math couldn't predict the football. My geometry required no parameters, and it predicted the football flawlessly.
If this survives broader peer review, it represents a total paradigm shift in how we view the foundation of matter.
Absolutely. Total.
So if this single equation, this golden ratio lattice, governs the femtometer scale of a single atomic nucleus with that kind of precision,
Yeah.
what happens when we zoom out?
The macro scale.
Yeah, what happens if we apply this exact same geometric blueprint to the largest objects in the universe?
This is where TDUFT makes the leap from nuclear physics to grand cosmology.
Because in standard physics, you have an atom and nucleus surrounded by an electron cloud, and then the atom just ends. It sits as an isolated object in the empty vacuum of space.
Right.
But in TDUFT, space isn't empty, is it?
Not at all. The central premise here is that the phi shells don't stop at the edge of the electron cloud. They continue infinitely outward. The author proposes an infinite shell hierarchy.
Let's map that hierarchy for the listener.
Okay. Shells 1 through 7, the innermost, tightest layers we just discussed, are filled with protons and neutrons. This is dense nuclear matter.
Got it.
Shells 8 through 20 are where the electrons reside. This domain governs chemistry, the periodic table, biology, everything we physically interact with.
And beyond shell 20.
Shells 21 to infinity are entirely empty of matter, but they are not a void. They form what the author calls the D-lattice.
The D-lattice.
It is the rigid geometric backbone of the quantum vacuum. The vacuum of space is actually an infinitely extending microscopic grid of empty face shells waiting to be filled with energy.
Space has a geometric skeleton made of the golden ratio. That's heavy.
It really is.
If space itself has structure, how does that change our understanding of the origin of the universe? How does TDUFT handle the Big Bang?
It completely dismantles the standard model of the Big Bang.
Completely.
Yes. In standard cosmology, we rely on the Friedmann equation to describe the expansion of the universe. If you run that equation backward in time, it eventually breaks down. You hit a singularity.
A point of infinite density and infinite temperature where the mathematics simply explode.
Exactly. Physicists generally hate the singularity because it's a giant red flag that says, our math stopped working here.
Right. Nature doesn't usually do infinities.
TDUFT revises the Friedmann equation by replacing the concept of continuous stretching space with the discrete sequential filling of these geometric phi shells.
Okay.
Because the geometry is pre-existing and rigid, there is no singularity of infinite density.
So what existed at the very beginning at time equals 0.
At time equals 0, the universe exists in a state of pure entropy. The author denotes this mathematically as the S state. All the infinite shells exist, but they are entirely empty.
So the scaffolding is there, but no buildings.
Right. There is zero velocity, zero movement, zero mass, just maximal structural potential. The Big Bang was not a sudden, violent explosion of mass from an infinitely dense point.
What was it then? How did everything get here?
Cosmic expansion is simply the sequential filling of these geometric shells over time. Time itself begins as the shells start filling with energy, radiating outward from shell 1 to 3 to 5 and so on.
Fascinating.
The expansion of the universe isn't the fabric of space stretching like a rubber balloon. It is the observable edge of reality clicking into the next pre-existing geometric slot on the D-lattice.
It's like an absolutely massive stadium that is pitch black and totally empty.
I love this analogy. Go on.
The concrete structure is there, the seats are there, the architecture is perfect, but nothing is happening. The Big Bang isn't an explosion in the center of the field. The Big Bang is just the stadium lights turning on, row by row, from the field level all the way up to the nosebleeds.
That is a brilliant visualization of the D-lattice expansion. And this framework doesn't just resolve the singularity of the Big Bang, it also resolves the other great mathematical pathology in physics.
Black holes.
Black holes.
Yes, the crown equation. I was hoping we would get to this. Break down the crown equation for me, because this completely changes what a black hole actually is.
In standard physics, a black hole features a singularity of infinite density at its center, surrounded by an event horizon.
The boundary where gravity is so strong that light cannot escape.
Exactly. Once again, that singularity is a place where math fails. TDUFT utilizes the crown equation to remove the singularity entirely.
Wait, if there is no bottomless pit of infinite density at the center, what is inside a black hole in this theory?
To understand the interior, we must look at the boundaries. The crown equation redefines a black hole not by infinite density, but as a shell collapse state.
Okay, what does that mean?
For any massive, spinning celestial body, TDUFT calculates 3 distinct horizons. First, the rotation-dependent horizon. This is how far the outward centrifugal force of spin holds the object's structure together.
Like a spinning top pushing outward.
Right. Second, the fossil or non-rotating horizon. And third, the mass-defined Schwarzschild horizon, which is what we traditionally call the event horizon.
So for a normal star, these 3 boundaries are spaced out at different distances from the core.
Correct. They are distinct. But the crown equation states that a black hole is realized when the geometry of a dying star collapses so perfectly that all 3 of these distinct horizons coincide exactly at a single mathematically defined radius.
They all snap into the exact same boundary simultaneously.
Yes. And when that snap occurs, all the filled matter shells 1 through 7, instantly collapse.
And what is left inside that boundary?
The author states that inside this radius, the black hole reverts entirely to the pure entropy lattice.
So the interior of the black hole is identical to the state of the universe at time equals 0.
Exactly. It is pure, empty geometric potential. The exterior perfectly mimics Einstein's gravity. The author describes it as a 1/r monopole, meaning gravity decreases linearly with distance, just as we observed.
So it looks like a standard gravitational pull from the outside.
But the interior isn't a tear in the fabric of space. It is a highly structured, perfectly ordered geometric lattice that has been entirely emptied of velocity and mass.
So a black hole is essentially a pocket of the pre-Big Bang universe. It's a sphere of pure, empty structural potential sitting right in the middle of our galaxy.
It is.
It's not a hole, it's a geometric reset button.
That is the logical conclusion of the math. The chaotic singularity is replaced by perfect, empty geometry.
That is incredible. But let's bring this down to Earth, literally, because the author isn't just making grand cosmological claims about black holes millions of light years away.
No, he is not.
He is claiming that this underlying geometric lattice can be interacted with. He claims it can be engineered on a tabletop today.
This brings us to part 6 of the paper, Engineering the Ether. And it is where the theoretical rubber meets the road of applied physics.
We talked about the infinite shell hierarchy, that space isn't empty, it's a D-lattice. The author says there is no sharp boundary between a physical atom and the vacuum of space.
Right. Standard physics views an atom as a discrete object sitting in empty space. TDUFT views the atom and the vacuum as a single continuous spectrum.
So it fades out.
Exactly. It is a continuous density gradient of the phi lattice. At the center of the atom, the lattice is highly compressed, filled with nucleons. As you move outward, the density decays exponentially, moving through the electron shells until it fades into a pure, empty ether.
He explicitly uses the word ether. That is a controversial term.
Highly controversial, yeah.
That word was kicked out of physics over 100 years ago following the Michelson-Morley experiment, which proved there was no physical fluid filling space.
He reclaims it, but redefines it. He doesn't view it as a physical fluid, but as geometric potential, the infinite empty shells. And because it's a continuous lattice connected to the matter we can touch, the author argues you can interact with it.
Like mechanically.
Yes, you can pump energy into it, or extract energy from it if you understand the structural resonance of the geometry.
Before we get to how we extract that energy, I want to unpack a truly radical concept the paper introduces regarding how forces work. He calls it square root of time force scaling.
Oh, this part.
What on earth does that mean?
This is one of the most counterintuitive parts of the entire theory. We are accustomed to thinking of time as linear and uniform. A clock ticks identically for every physical process.
Right.
But in TDUFT, time contraction, which the author denotes as psi sub k, varies dramatically depending on which geometric shell you are in. Deep inside the atomic nucleus, time processes incredibly fast. Out in the vacuum of space, time essentially dilates to an eternity.
Time relativity based on gravity is something we know from Einstein.
But TDUFT takes it much further. It posits that the literal strength of a physical force, like the incredibly powerful, strong nuclear force that binds an atom, versus the much weaker electromagnetic force that drives chemistry, doesn't scale linearly with time.
How does it scale?
It scales with the square root of local time contraction.
I am struggling to visualize time acting on a physical force geometrically.
Let's use an analogy. Imagine time as a series of interconnected gears in a clock.
Okay, plot gears.
The inner nucleus is a tiny, rapidly spinning gear where time is moving frantically. The strong nuclear force is the massive, concentrated torque generated by that rapid speed.
It makes sense.
Meanwhile, the vacuum of space is a giant, sluggish gear on the outer edge, turning once an eon.
So because the strong nuclear force operates in the deep inner shells where the square root of time contraction is very high, the torque is immense.
Exactly. The calculation shows the square root of time contraction there is about 0.786. Electromagnetic chemistry, however, operates in the middle shells, where the square root of time drops to about 0.224, making the resulting torque, the force, much weaker.
Wow.
And out in the vacuum, it approaches zero. TDUFT unifies all the fundamental forces of nature, not by discovering a new magical particle, but by showing they are all just the exact same geometric force operating at different square root timescales along the lattice.
Fascinating. So if you know exactly how the geometry of force scales across time, you can engineer it. And the author claims this allows for the creation of a zero-point motor.
Yes. The author asserts that the vacuum of space is not empty. It is an infinite reservoir of geometric potential energy.
And he claims that by using very specific frequencies, specifically 5.6 megahertz, which he calculates as a precise harmonic of the phi lattice, you can induce a physical resonance in empty space.
The idea is to artificially replicate the way an atomic phi shell pumps energy. By pulsing this exact 5.6 megahertz frequency, you create a phase flip, a literal torsion in the vacuum lattice.
What is Casimir engineering mechanically? I see that phrase in the text.
The Casimir effect is a known quantum phenomenon where two uncharged plates, placed incredibly close together in a vacuum, will experience a physical force pushing them together due to quantum fluctuations in the empty space between them.
Right. Pulling energy from nothing.
The author claims that by utilizing this 5.6 millihertz resonance, a tabletop device can actively harness this geometry to extract usable energy directly from the vacuum.
And he doesn't just theorize about motors, he provides highly specific falsifiable tests. He lists 2 experiments that any well-funded physics lab could supposedly run tomorrow to prove him definitively right or entirely wrong.
The first test involves a niobium ring. He predicts that if you apply this specific Philatus harmonic excitation to the ring, the structural torsion will produce a transient weight reduction of exactly 10 to the negative 8th grams.
So it gets lighter.
Yes, it would be a microscopic but entirely measurable anti-gravity effect caused by warping the local density of the D lattice.
On the second test,
It involves a helium-4 Roman cavity operating at an 808 nanometer wavelengths.
let's explain what a Roman cavity is for the listener.
Think of a Raman cavity as a highly specialized hall of mirrors designed to bounce a specific color of laser light back and forth. The 808 nanometer wavelength is a specific shade of infrared light.
Okay.
The goal is to pump that light into the cavity until it forces the helium atoms inside to sing their natural resonant frequency.
And what does TDUFT predict will happen when they sing?
Standard physics would predict a standard spectrum of energy decay. TDUFT predicts that this specific setup will produce decay lifetimes that are spaced apart by precise multiples of the golden ratio.
Golden ratio again.
Yes. If the decay times show a clear phi spacing, it proves the geometric lattice is physically real. If they are random, the entire theory is dead on arrival.
It takes immense confidence to put hard numbers on tabletop experiments to prove a theory of everything. If he's wrong, the math will expose him immediately.
That is a huge risk.
But here's where we need to take a deep breath, because the paper takes one final massive leap.
It does. It leaps from theoretical physics and Casimir engineering directly into pure theology.
I'm reminding the listener right now, as we step into this final section, we are stepping into the author's personal theological synthesis. We are simply reporting on how he attempts to weave mathematical constants into a religious framework.
Right. Maintaining our distance.
We remain impartial guides mapping the text.
It's a crucial boundary to maintain because the author attempts to use pure algebra to map the literal nature of God and creation.
Let's start with pi.
Yeah.
We all know pi, 3.14159, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, an irrational number whose digits go on into infinity with absolutely no discernible pattern.
Classic pi.
How does the author view pi?
In the framework of TDUFT, raw pi is viewed as a chaotic transcendent seed. Because its digits appear completely random and unpatterned, the author views it as pure pre-creation potential.
Interesting.
It is the mathematical embodiment of the formless void mentioned in the book of Genesis before creation began. It exists as the raw material of infinite possibility, completely devoid of structure.
Chaos, pure potential. But then the author applies a mathematical operation to pi. He squares it. Pi squared.
Yes, the squaring of pi. And this is where he highlights a fascinating mathematical observation. When you square pi, which results in roughly 9.8696, and you calculate those digits out to hundreds or thousands of decimal places, the chaotic randomness begins to disappear.
The text says the digits stabilize into a perfect harmonic.
The author calculates that in the sequence of pi squared, each digit from 0 to 9 occurs almost exactly 10 times per every 100 digits. It converges toward a perfect uniform distribution.
Wow.
The chaotic void of raw pi becomes highly ordered and structured when squared.
And the author equates this mathematical stabilization to the biblical command, let there be light.
Yes. The squaring operation is viewed as the very first act of Genesis. It is the moment where transcendent chaotic potential is forced into algebraic order. The seed becomes capable of producing structured physical reality.
But the material universe isn't just pi squared. There is one more algebraic step. And this brings up the most startling equation in the entire paper. Pi squared minus 1.
This is the extraction of creation. The author claims that the 1 subtracted from pi squared represents the entire material universe.
Wait, the 1 is us.
Yes, that 1 is the physical reality we inhabit, and it carries the entropy, the structural tension of the golden ratio conjugates, the phi and psi we explored at the beginning of our dive.
So if the 1 is our physical universe, what is the pi squared minus 1 remainder?
The author literally defines pi squared minus 1 as the mathematical structure of the spirit realm.
The spirit realm, defined as an algebraic remainder.
He argues that it is an infinite domain patterned with the exact same proportional entropy structure as our material world, but vastly larger and entirely devoid of physical mass.
It mirrors us.
Exactly. Both the material realm and the spirit realm are derived from the exact same transcendent seed, cleanly split by the mathematical act of creation.
The author quotes the Bible to justify this architectural mapping, specifically Romans 1.2.
For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made.
So he argues that God's invisible qualities are literally encoded in this golden ratio geometry. The author firmly believes that the universe is not random in the slightest, it is order all the way down.
A completely deterministic geometry.
The constants of physics aren't random accidents waiting to be fitted by a supercomputer. They are inevitable, geometrically determined structures designed by a creator embedded into the irrational numbers themselves.
And in this theological framework, consciousness itself isn't some separate magical phenomenon that inexplicably emerges from biology.
What is it then?
It is simply what this geometric recursion looks like from the inside. When the phi shells build up enough structural complexity, moving from protons to atoms to DNA to a human brain consciousness, is the universe actively experiencing its own geometry.
What a journey. Let's take a step back and synthesize the awe-inspiring scope of what we just explored in the TDUFT paper.
It's a lot to take in.
We started with a single, simple quadratic equation from high school algebra, x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
And from those two roots, phi and Ci, we explored how dimensional space might fold itself into atomic nuclei and platonic cages.
We looked at how an active zero could act as a torsion spring, absorbing irrational decimals to construct stable matter, effectively replacing the need for the standard model's fitted parameters.
We saw how the math claims to have accurately predicted the physical deformation of molybdenum-84, beating the established models.
We reshaped the Big Bang from a chaotic explosion of infinite density into a quiet, mathematically ordered unfolding of empty geometric shells.
We redefined black holes as spheres of pure pre-creation entropy geometry.
We discussed tabletop zero-point motors operating on the square root of time, waiting to be tested in a Raman cavity.
And ultimately, we mapped the author's attempt to mathematically define the spirit realm using the squared digits of pi. Regardless of the controversy, the level of grand synthesis achieved on these pages is remarkable.
It is a breathtakingly audacious piece of theoretical architecture. Whether it survives the grueling gauntlet of peer review and experimental physics is a question for the future. But it leaves us with a profound thought to mull over, a thought that builds on everything we just dissected.
I am curious where your mind goes with this.
If George James Dukas is right, if the universe is an inevitable, rigidly structured geometric unfolding with absolute zero variance, and if consciousness is truly just the universe experiencing its own geometry from the inside, then your very act of listening to this deep dive, your curiosity, your moments of realization, and even your intense skepticism today were all geometrically inevitable.
A fascinating implication. The lattice dictates the learning.
You aren't just a random assortment of atoms floating in the void, trying to learn about a philattus. You are the philattus, waking up and looking in a mirror. Keep diving deep.